Is this some kind of joke? The officer's voice, sharp and laced with disdain, cut through the humid afternoon air. She stood with one hand cocked on her hip, her mirrored sunglasses reflecting a distorted, wide-angle view of the man seated before her. "Do you even know where you are, old man?" Silas Crane, 82 years young, did not answer. He remained perfectly still astride his vintage motorcycle, a gleaming machine of polished chrome and deep burgundy paint that hummed with residual heat. His hands, wrapped in worn leather gloves, rested easy on the handlebars. His gaze was fixed somewhere beyond the officer, on the long, shimmering ribbon of asphalt that stretched toward the horizon. He'd seen horizons like this before, some choked with smoke, others with dust, all of them promising either a home or a grave. This one was just quiet. The first officer, whose name tag read Kinsley, exchanged an exasperated look with her younger partner, Miller. "License and registration," Kinsley demanded, her voice louder this time, as if speaking to someone hard of hearing or slow of mind. "Shut that damn bike off. Now." Silas blinked slowly, his calm a stark contrast to the aggressive energy radiating from the officers. He brought his attention back to them, his dark eyes clear and perceptive. He dismounted with a fluid grace that defied his age, the worn leather of his jacket creaking softly. The engine ticked as it cooled. With deliberate movements, he reached into his jacket, retrieved a faded leather wallet, and handed over his license and the bike's registration. Kinsley snatched them from his hand. She scanned the license. Silas Crane, 82. She let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You're a little old for a joyride, aren't you, Silas?" She passed the documents to Miller to run them. "What's the hurry? We clocked you going a little too fast coming into town limits." "I wasn't in a hurry, officer," Silas said, his voice a low, steady baritone. It was a voice accustomed to giving commands and finding calm in chaos, but now it was used only for simple truth. "I was keeping pace with traffic." "The law is the law, not a suggestion," Kinsley snapped back. "We got a report about a suspicious individual on a loud motorcycle casing the shops downtown. An old man, they said. Fits your description." The accusation hung in the air, thick and ugly. "Casing?" Silas repeated the word, not with anger, but with a quiet sort of curiosity, as if he were examining a strange new species of insect. A small crowd had begun to gather on the sidewalk of the quaint main street. A mother pulled her child closer. A few teenagers started recording on their phones, their faces a mixture of glee and apprehension. The spectacle of two police officers dressing down an elderly black man was a drama too potent to ignore. Kinsley seemed to swell under the attention, her authority magnified by the audience. She circled Silas, her eyes cataloging him like evidence. "What's this?" she asked, her finger jabbing at a small weathered patch sewn onto the breast of his jacket. It was a simple leather circle, faded and cracked, depicting a crudely stitched hawk in mid-dive. "Your little biker gang? The ancient aviators?" She smirked at her own joke. Miller shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "It's a keepsake," Silas said evenly. "A keepsake," Kinsley repeated, her voice dripping with mockery. "Right. Look, I don't know what you're playing at, but this story isn't flying. You're being evasive, you match a description, and frankly, you look like you could be a danger to yourself and others." She took a step closer, her face inches from his. "We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. We can search you and your vehicle right now, or we can take you downtown and tear it apart there. Your choice." The threat was clear. The humiliation was the point. Silas's jaw remained relaxed, his breathing even. He had stood his ground before men far more intimidating than this brash officer. He had faced down death itself in jungles so thick the sky disappeared. Her anger was just noise, but the disrespect that landed, it landed on a place deep inside him that he kept guarded, a place of honor and memory. He didn't flinch. He simply met her gaze, his own eyes holding the weight of decades she couldn't possibly comprehend. "You will not search my motorcycle," he said, the words quiet but infused with an unshakable finality. Kinsley's face hardened, her feigned patience evaporating completely. "That's it. Miller, cuff him. Obstruction." As Miller hesitantly reached for his cuffs, Silas's eyes drifted past Kinsley's shoulder, back to that patch on his chest. The sun glinted off the cracked leather, and for a fleeting second, the quiet street dissolved. The air was no longer thick with humidity, but with rotor wash and red dust. The sound wasn't a ticking engine, but the deafening whump-whump-whump of Huey helicopter blades. He was 24 again, sweat stinging his eyes, the smell of aviation fuel and fear filling his lungs. A young warrant officer, a kid named Chavez with a face full of freckles, was screaming over the comms, his voice cracking with panic as green tracers stitched the air around their medevac bird. Below them, a pinned-down infantry squad was about to be overrun. Protocol said to abort. The landing zone was too hot, but Silas, the pilot in command, saw the faces of the men on the ground. He keyed his mic, his own voice cutting through the chaos with that same unnatural calm. "We're going in," he'd said. The hawk patch on his flight jacket, a gift from a grateful tribe in the Highlands, felt like a talisman against the storm. I said, "Cuff him." Kinsley's shriek pulled him back to the present. The vision vanished, leaving only the sun-drenched pavement and the officer's furious face. The memory, a flash of fire and duty, settled back into its quiet corner of his soul, its significance a secret she was trampling with her ignorance. Across the street, half hidden behind a newspaper box, a young man named Leo watched the scene unfold, his phone held loosely in his hand. He wasn't recording for spectacle, he was documenting an injustice. A journalism student at the local community college, he had a nose for stories, and this one smelled wrong. The old man wasn't aggressive, he was dignified. The officer was on a power trip. Leo had seen the patch on the old man's jacket. It was faded, almost illegible, but it sparked a memory. His own grandfather, a retired Air Force colonel, had a shadow box full of old squadron patches. They were sacred objects, each telling a story of service and sacrifice. Kinsley's mockery of the patch felt like a desecration. As Miller fumbled with the handcuffs, clearly reluctant, Kinsley escalated her tirade. "We're going to impound this rust bucket, and you're coming with us for a full evaluation. Maybe you're confused. Maybe you've got dementia. We'll find out." That was the breaking point for Leo. This wasn't a traffic stop anymore. It was an abuse of power. He remembered a story his grandfather had told him about a special unit at the nearby Army Aviation Base, Fort Gideon, a legendary unit. His grandfather had mentioned them in hushed, reverent tones. The Nighthawks, he'd called them. "If you ever see a man wearing that diving hawk, you show him your respect. He's walked through hell so you don't have to." Leo's heart pounded. It was a long shot, a crazy idea, but he had to do something. He quickly searched for the public affairs office at Fort Gideon. The first number he found went to a generic voicemail. He tried another, a non-emergency line for the base command. A crisp, professional voice answered. "Fort Gideon Command. How may I direct your call?" Leo's own voice trembled slightly. "Yes, hello. My name is Leo. I'm in downtown Astoria, on Main Street. The local police have pulled over an elderly man, an elderly black man. I think he might be one of yours." "Sir, this is a line for the military base," the operator said, a hint of impatience in her tone. "We don't get involved in local police matters." "No, you don't understand," Leo insisted, his voice rising with urgency as he watched Miller finally click one cuff onto Silas's wrist. "He's wearing a patch, a leather patch with a hawk on it, a diving hawk. My grandfather, he told me what that meant. The police are arresting him. They're calling him senile. His name is Silas Crane." There was a sudden sharp silence on the other end of the line. The operator's professional detachment vanished, replaced by something else. A new energy. "Repeat that name, son." "Silas Crane," Leo said, enunciating every syllable. He heard a muffled sound, the operator speaking to someone else in the room, her voice urgent and low. Then, another voice came on the line. Deeper, harder, a voice that carried innate authority. "This is Colonel Davies. Where are you, son? Give me your exact location." Leo rattled off the street names, his eyes wide. He could hear keyboards clacking furiously in the background, hushed but intense commands being given. The atmosphere on the other end of the phone had transformed from bureaucratic indifference to coiled spring tension in a matter of seconds. "Stay on the line," the colonel commanded. "Help is on the way." Inside the command center at Fort Gideon, the name Silas Crane had landed like a thunderclap. The operator who took the initial call, a young sergeant, had gone pale. She had immediately alerted the duty officer, who in turn had sprinted down the hall to Colonel Davies's office without even knocking. Davies, a man with a chest full of ribbons and the sharp eyes of a career aviator, was in the middle of a logistics briefing. When his aide burst in and whispered the name, Davies stood up so fast his chair screeched back against the floor. The briefing was over. "Get me a map of Astoria now," he barked. "Who is the senior officer on duty at the local PD? Get me their chief on the line. I want every available vehicle from the command motor pool fueled and ready." Now, the room, once filled with the dull drone of a PowerPoint presentation, erupted into controlled chaos. Maps were unfurled, phones rang. Young officers moved with a speed and purpose they usually reserved for live-fire exercises. The name Silas Crane was not just a name to them. It was a legend. It was the name of the man who had almost single-handedly founded their elite aviation unit. He was the original Nighthawk, a pilot whose exploits in Vietnam were the stuff of whispered legend, a man who had flown missions no one else would dare, who had saved hundreds of lives, and who had been awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for an act of valor so profound it was still taught as a case study in courage at the War College. He was, to the men and women of Fort Gideon, living history. The idea that he was on a roadside in handcuffs being humiliated by local cops was not just an insult, it was a sacrilege. "Sir, the Chief of Police is on line 1, an aide announced. Davies snatched the phone. "This is Colonel Marcus Davies, commanding officer of the 160th SOAR. I am informed that 2 of your officers are currently detaining Master Chief Warrant Officer 5 Silas Crane, retired. You have 60 seconds to explain to me why I shouldn't bring the full weight of the United States Army down on your little town." His voice was lethally calm, a razor blade wrapped in silk. On Main Street, Officer Kinsley was savoring her victory. She had the old man in cuffs, the bike was about to be towed, and the crowd was watching her, the arbiter of law and order. She had shown everyone who was in charge. "All right, Grandpa, let's go," she said, grabbing Silas's arm. "Time for your checkup. We need to make sure you're competent to even be on the road." It was the final, arrogant overreach. She wasn't just enforcing the law, she was stripping him of his dignity, questioning the very soundness of his mind. She was erasing the man and replacing him with a caricature of her own making, a confused, belligerent old man who was a public nuisance. The crowd murmured, a wave of discomfort rippling through them. The blatant cruelty of her words was too much even for the most cynical onlookers. Silas didn't resist. He simply stood, his cuffed hands behind his back, his posture as straight as a flagpole. He had endured worse. He had been a prisoner of war for 6 months. This was nothing. But the pity in the eyes of the crowd stung more than the cold metal of the cuffs. Miller, who had been trying to make himself small, suddenly looked up, his eyes wide. He tugged on Kinsley's sleeve. "Kinsley? What is it, Miller?" She snapped, irritated by the interruption. "Listen," he said. At first it was just a faint, rhythmic thrumming, a vibration felt more in the chest than heard with the ears. It was a sound that was deeply, fundamentally out of place in the quiet downtown. Then it grew, a low, guttural beat that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Wump, 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 wump. Heads turned. The crowd looked up at the sky, confused. The sound was getting louder, closer, resolving into the unmistakable, concussive roar of multiple helicopters. High above, 3 sleek, black-painted Apaches swept over the town in a tight formation, their shadows passing like fleeting clouds over the street. They weren't armed for war, but their presence was a statement of overwhelming power. They circled once, a gesture of aerial salute, before banking hard and heading back toward the base. But the real spectacle was on the ground. Screeching to a halt at both ends of the block, boxing in the police cruiser, were 4 black Chevrolet Suburbans with government plates. Doors flew open and a dozen figures in crisp Army Class A uniforms disembarked. They moved with a disciplined urgency that made the local police look like amateurs. They were a mix of ranks and ages, but they all carried themselves with the same unmistakable bearing of elite soldiers. The last to emerge from the lead vehicle was a tall, imposing man with silvering temples and the eagle insignia of a full colonel on his shoulders. He strode forward, his polished black shoes clicking on the pavement. The crowd parted before him like the Red Sea. He ignored everyone. The crowd, Kinsley, Miller, his eyes fixed on only one person. He stopped 3 feet in front of Silas Crane. His back went ramrod straight. He brought his right hand up in a salute so sharp and precise it could have cut glass. "Master Chief Warrant Officer Crane." Colonel Davis's voice boomed across the now silent street. "Colonel Marcus Davis, 160th SOAR. Sir, it is an honor." Kinsley's jaw dropped. The color drained from her face, leaving a pasty, sickly white. Miller looked like he was about to faint. The crowd gasped, a collective sound of shock and realization. The teenagers who had been snickering and recording now held their phones steady, capturing a moment of profound, unexpected gravitas. The other soldiers followed their commander's lead, forming a loose semicircle and rendering their own salutes. A dozen hands, all raised in a gesture of ultimate respect to the cuffed old man. Davies held his salute, his eyes locked on Silas's. "Sir, I was informed you were in some distress." He slowly lowered his hand and his gaze fell to the handcuffs. A flicker of cold fury crossed his face before he masked it. He turned to Kinsley, his voice dropping to a dangerously low temperature. "Officer, explain to me why you have a national hero in restraints." Kinsley stammered, her arrogance shattered. He was speeding. He matched a description. He was being uncooperative. Uncooperative. Davies' voice was ice. He took a step toward her, and she flinched back. This man is Silas Crane. Do you have any idea who that is? This man holds the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, 3 Bronze Stars for valor, 4 Purple Hearts. He flew over 800 combat missions in Vietnam. He was shot down twice, captured once, and still went back. He is the man who created the pilot training program for the unit I am now privileged to command. The tactics that U.S. Army helicopter pilots use to this day to fly into hot landing zones to rescue wounded soldiers were invented by him, in the cockpit, under enemy fire. With each sentence, Davies' voice grew stronger, a litany of honor that echoed through the stunned silence. He pointed a rigid finger at the faded patch on Silas's jacket. You see this patch? This isn't a biker gang emblem. This is the original insignia of the Night Hawks. He is pilot number 1. He doesn't wear it. He is it. This man has been entrusted with the lives of hundreds of soldiers and with military hardware worth more than your entire city budget, and you have him in handcuffs because you thought he looked suspicious. Davies turned to one of his men. Sergeant Major, remove those cuffs. The Sergeant Major, a mountain of a man with a stern face, stepped forward. He didn't have a key. He simply produced a small tool from his pocket, and with 2 deft clicks the handcuffs fell away from Silas's wrists. Silas rubbed his wrists, his expression unchanged, still a mask of calm dignity. Davies then turned his full, wrathful attention back to Kinsley and the now trembling Miller. You two are a disgrace to your uniforms. Your chief is on his way here, and you can believe me when I tell you that he and I are going to have a very long conversation. It will likely be followed by a formal apology from your department and a mandatory retraining program on how to treat citizens with respect, particularly the ones who have bled for your right to wear that badge. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Now step aside. Humbled and terrified, Kinsley and Miller practically scrambled out of the way. Colonel Davies turned back to Silas, his demeanor softening instantly. Sir, are you all right? Can we give you a ride back to the base? Silas finally smiled, a small weary curve of his lips. I'm fine, Marcus. Thank you for the dramatic entrance. A little over the top even for you. Davies allowed himself a small smile in return. We aim to impress, Si. You taught us that. Silas looked from the colonel to the shaken officers, then to the wide-eyed crowd. He saw the teenager, Leo, still standing by the newspaper box, a look of awe on his face. Silas met the boy's eyes and gave a slow, deliberate nod of thanks. He then turned to Kinsley, who was staring at the ground, unable to meet his gaze. Officer, Silas said, his voice gentle now, devoid of any anger or triumph. Courage and authority are not the same thing. Authority is a badge you're given. Courage is what you do when no one is looking. Remember that. He patted the leather patch on his chest. The sun caught it again, and for a moment the image of the diving hawk seemed to burn with a new intensity. He wasn't looking at the street anymore. The jungle floor. A clearing. Smelling of rain and cordite. A much younger Colonel Davies, then just a fresh-faced lieutenant, was handing him the patch, freshly stitched by a local villager. It was a gift for an impossible rescue, for flying a crippled helicopter through a monsoon to extract Davies's wounded patrol. The village elder called you Andy, the spirit hawk that hunts in the dark. The young Davies had said, his voice thick with emotion. He said you fly where others can't. He's right. Silas had taken the patch, a simple piece of leather that now felt heavier than any metal. It wasn't a symbol of rank or an award from a general. It was a token of respect from the men whose lives he had saved. It was a promise. The aftermath was swift and decisive. As Colonel Davies had promised, Astoria's chief of police arrived, his face a mask of mortified apology. There was a tense private conversation held on the sidewalk, the contents of which left Officer Kinsley suspended and Officer Miller on administrative duty pending a full internal investigation. The city issued a formal public apology to Silas Crane, which he graciously accepted, but the real change came later. Fort Gideon, in partnership with the Astoria PD, established the Silas Crane Valor Program, a mandatory training initiative for all new recruits and a refresher for veterans. It focused on de-escalation, community engagement, and most importantly, recognizing the quiet signs of service and sacrifice in their community's elders. The story of the traffic stop on Main Street became a core part of the curriculum, a cautionary tale of what happens when authority forgets humility. A few months later, Silas was at the local hardware store picking out some bolts for a fence he was mending. As he stood in the aisle, a woman approached him hesitantly. It was Kinsley, no longer in uniform, dressed in simple civilian clothes. Her face was etched with a humility he hadn't seen before. Mr. Crane, she said, her voice quiet, I just wanted to apologize, in person. What I did was, there's no excuse. Silas looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "We all make mistakes, young lady. The important thing is what we learn from them. I'm in the Valor program now," she said, volunteering at the VA center. Listening to their stories, I see things differently now." "Good," Silas said, offering a small, genuine smile. "That's all anyone can ask." He turned to go, then paused. "Keep listening," he added. "The best stories are often the quietest." He walked away, leaving her standing in the aisle, a lesson learned not in a classroom or from a superior's reprimand, but from the simple, unassuming grace of a true hero. The story of Silas Crane reminds us that heroes don't always wear capes or announce their presence. They are the quiet figures among us, the unassuming neighbors and silent veterans whose courage is written not in headlines but in the fabric of their lives. If you were inspired by this story of valor and vindication, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories that honor our nation's heroes.